He expected silence. When the widowed cowboy stepped onto the ranch he'd just inherited, he thought it was empty. Abandoned land, dry fences, nothing left but dust and memories. That's what everyone told him. But then, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong on a forgotten ranch. Movement where there shouldn't be any. Eyes watching from places no one had checked in years. What he was about to discover wasn't one animal or 10. It was hundreds of living creatures surviving in secret, without help, without protection, waiting for someone to finally notice them. And in that moment, the ranch didn't just change his future. It rewrote his entire life. The letter arrived 3 months after the funeral, long after the casseroles stopped coming and the house settled back into its quiet. It was thin, official-looking, and addressed in handwriting the widowed cowboy barely recognized. He almost didn't open it. Nothing good ever came in envelopes like that. Inside was a single page and a key taped to the bottom. The ranch had belonged to a distant uncle he hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years, a man who vanished from family gatherings, from phone calls, from memory. According to the letter, the property had been sitting untouched for years. No livestock, no workers, no value anyone could see. The county had been ready to absorb it, but legally, it now belonged to him. When the cowboy mentioned it in town, people reacted the same way every time. A slow shake of the head, a half smile that meant don't bother. That place, one man said, been dead a long time. Another added, nothing out there but broken fences and bad luck. He told himself he'd drive out, take a look, maybe sell it cheap and be done with it. He wasn't looking for a project. He was barely holding himself together. Since his wife passed, life had narrowed into small, manageable routines. Wake up, work, eat, sleep. Grief had a way of shrinking the world. The ranch sat miles off the main road, past land that still showed signs of life. Grazing cattle, windmills turning, trucks moving with purpose. But as he drove farther, those signs faded. The road thinned. The fences leaned. Grass grew wild where it shouldn't have. When he finally reached the gate, he stopped the truck and just sat there. The sign was sun-bleached, the name barely readable. Chains hung loose, rusted through, as if no one had bothered to lock it in years. He cut the engine, and the silence rushed in fast and heavy. No cattle lowing, no birds lifting, no windmill creaking. This is pointless, he muttered, stepping out anyway. The ground beneath his boots was packed hard but marked, subtle impressions in the dirt, like something had passed through recently. He ignored it at first. Old tracks, probably. Wind and time played tricks. Then he heard it. Not loud, not clear, just wrong. A faint rustle somewhere beyond the hills. A sound with weight behind it. Movement where there should have been none. He froze, listening. The ranch wasn't empty, and whatever was out there had been very much alive. The cowboy stood still longer than he meant to, one hand resting on the truck door, listening. The sound didn't come again, but the silence felt different now, charged like it was holding something back. He told himself it was nothing. Wind and dry brush. A rabbit. His mind filling the gaps because grief had trained it to expect ghosts. Still, he grabbed his hat and shut the door a little harder than necessary. The first thing he noticed as he walked farther in was the grass. It wasn't overgrown the way abandoned land usually was. Patches were worn down, grazed unevenly, as if something had been feeding there. Not recently, but consistently. Paths cut through the brush where no human boots had gone in years. Narrow trails, beaten just enough to matter. He crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the dirt, still damp beneath the surface. That didn't make sense. The nearest working well was miles away, and the old windmill ahead looked frozen in time, blade stiff, ladder half collapsed. Yet there it was, water pooled in a low spot, clear enough to reflect the sky. This isn't possible, he said quietly. A little farther on, he found bones. Not scattered, not picked clean by scavengers the way nature usually left them. These were older, sun-bleached, and tucked beneath a mesquite, almost respectfully. Nearby, tufts of hair clung to the bark. Coarse in some places, fine in others. Too many kinds. His pace slowed. Every sense sharpened in spite of him. He became aware of small movements at the edges of his vision. shadows pulling back, shapes dissolving into brush the moment he turned his head. Whatever was here didn't want to be seen. He followed one of the narrow trails uphill, breathing a little harder as the land opened. The fence line that should have cut across the property was gone entirely, swallowed by earth and time. In its place stood natural barriers, rock walls, thorn brush, steep drops that funneled movement in specific directions. Someone at some point had understood this land. The sound came again, closer this time, a low shuffle, the scrape of hooves, or something like them, on stone. His heart kicked hard against his ribs as he stepped up onto a rise and looked down into a shallow basin. For a moment, he saw nothing but scrub and shadow. Then a head lifted, then another. Eyes caught the light. Dozens of them. Different heights. Different shapes. The cowboy's breath left him all at once. This wasn't one animal. It was many, and they were watching him, silent, wary, and very much alive. The cowboy didn't move. Not forward. Not back. Every instinct he had told him that whatever balance existed in that basin was fragile, and one wrong step could shatter it. The animals stared from the brush like they had been carved there, still, alert, measuring him. He counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 5, 10. He lost track somewhere after that. Some stood tall with long legs and narrow chests. Others were smaller, tucked behind brush or rock, barely visible except for the flick of an ear or the blink of an eye. They weren't acting wild the way truly feral animals did. They were acting careful. A thin horse stepped forward first. Its ribs showed through a dusty coat, but its posture was steady. Not aggressive, not panicked, just watchful. Behind it, shapes shifted, goats by the look of them, a few cattle, maybe even sheep. Species that had no business surviving out here alone, much less together. This can't be real, he whispered. He knelt slowly and let his hat fall to the dirt, hands open at his sides. The horse snorted once, testing the air, then stopped. No one ran. No one charged. They just watched. That scared him more than if they had bolted. He scanned the basin, and that's when he noticed the details that made his stomach drop. Makeshift water catchments dug into stone. Old troughs repaired with scrap wood and wire. Salt blocks worn smooth by countless tongues. Someone had planned this. Someone had maintained it long enough for routines to form. For trust, however fragile, to exist. The cowboy stood and walked the perimeter slowly, eyes darting between animals and land. He spotted hoof prints layered over one another, paths connecting grazing areas to water, shaded resting spots used again and again. This wasn't survival by accident. It was survival by design. The thought unsettled him. Who would go to this much effort and then disappear? A sudden movement snapped his attention back to the center of the basin. A calf stumbled forward, legs stiff, favoring one side. Another animal nudged it back gently, blocking its path toward him. Protection. Community. He'd spent his life around livestock, but he'd never seen anything like this. A self-organized herd made of leftovers, rejects, animals that should have been gone years ago. A breeze shifted, carrying the smell of dust and sun-warmed hide. The horse lifted its head again, ears swiveling toward the hills behind him. Then, as if on some unspoken signal, the animals began to retreat. Not in panic, not scattered. They moved as one, flowing back into brush and shadow, disappearing along paths he hadn't noticed until they were using them. Within seconds, the basin was empty again. The cowboy stood alone, heart pounding, staring at the place where dozens of lives had just existed. And one question burned louder than all the rest. How many more were still out there? The basin stayed quiet long after the animals vanished, but the cowboy didn't turn back. He couldn't. The land had already changed for him. What he'd seen couldn't be unseen. He followed the direction they'd gone. The path was narrow, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. Pressed grass, scuffed stone, branches broken just enough to mark regular passage. It wound between rock faces and thick brush, places a truck could never reach. Even on foot, it felt like the land was trying to turn him away. The air shifted as he climbed. Cooler, damp. The smell of water grew stronger, and with it came a faint chorus of sounds, breathing, hooves shifting, the low murmur of life just out of sight. Then the trail opened. The cowboy stepped forward and stopped cold. Before him stretched a wide valley, hidden completely from the main ranch by a natural wall of stone and trees. Sunlight poured in from above, lighting a patchwork of green that had no business existing here. Grass grew thick and tall. Trees bore fresh bark marks. The ground was churned with tracks, hundreds of them, overlapping, layered alive. And everywhere he looked, animals. Horses clustered near a shallow stream. Cattle grazed farther out, heads low and calm. Goats balanced effortlessly along rock ledges. Sheep huddled in groups, pressed close together. Some animals bore old scars. Others showed signs of age, clouded eyes, stiff joints, uneven gaits. This wasn't a herd. It was a refuge. The cowboy's chest tightened as the number registered. Not dozens, not even close. The valley was full, living, breathing proof that something impossible had been happening here for years. He moved slowly, making himself small, heart hammering. A few animals shifted away, but most didn't flee. They knew this place. They trusted it. And somehow, they trusted the system that had kept them alive. Near the stream, he spotted something that made his throat close. An old shed, barely standing, tucked beneath cottonwoods. Its door hung crooked, patched with mismatched boards. Inside, the air smelled of hay and rust. Tools lay where someone had dropped them long ago. A notebook sat on a shelf, pages warped from moisture. Someone had lived here. Not recently, but not ancient history either. He flipped a page. Numbers. Feed tallies. Notes about injuries. Short phrases written in careful handwriting. No name. No explanations. Just quiet proof of daily care. A memory surfaced. Town rumors about a man who used to take in problem animals. A caretaker people mocked. Someone who stopped showing up one day and was eventually forgotten. The cowboy sank onto a crate, overwhelmed. This wasn't just land he'd inherited. It was a promise someone else had made and left unfinished. As the sun dipped lower, the animals settled around him, forming loose circles, watching with tired eyes. And for the first time since his wife died, the cowboy felt something shift inside him. He wasn't alone anymore, but he had no idea how he was going to save all of them. The cowboy spent the night in his truck at the edge of the hidden valley, sleeping in short, broken stretches. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. Faces in the dusk, silhouettes moving through grass, lives depending on a balance so fragile it made his chest ache. At first light, he started counting. Not officially, not carefully, just enough to understand the scale of what he was dealing with. He walked the valley's perimeter, marking clusters in his head. Horses by the stream, cattle in the lower pasture, goats scattered along the rock walls, sheep pressed together near the trees. By mid-morning, the number stopped making sense. He reached 50 and realized he wasn't even close. 100 came and went, and still the valley felt full. Animals emerged from shaded pockets he hadn't seen before. Others moved in from trails leading farther into the hills. Some were so thin they blended into the land itself, while others bore the solid weight of long-term survival. 200, maybe more. He leaned against a tree, breath shallow, staring out at a scene that defied logic. No deliveries, no steady income, no modern infrastructure. And yet here they were, alive. Ow, he whispered. The answer was everywhere once he slowed down enough to see it. Natural springs diverted with stone. Seasonal grazing rotated by terrain. Windbreaks built where storms hit hardest. Even the animals themselves played roles. Goats clearing brush, cattle opening paths, horses leading movement. This valley wasn't random. It was engineered quietly, patiently, by someone who understood both land and loss. The notebook from the shed weighed heavy in his jacket pocket. He flipped through it again, this time paying attention to dates. The entries spanned years. Careful notes tapered off slowly, not suddenly, as if the writer had known the end was coming and prepared the animals the only way he could, teaching them to live without him. The realization hit hard. This place wasn't abandoned. It was left behind on purpose. By noon, the cowboy faced a truth he couldn't outrun. Even if he sold the ranch tomorrow, even if he walked away pretending he'd seen nothing, these animals would be discovered eventually. And without someone willing to step in, they wouldn't survive the attention. Rescue would cost money he didn't have. Tommy wasn't sure he could give. Emotion he'd locked away just to keep breathing. He'd already lost everything once. Losing again might break him. A horse approached, slow and deliberate, the same thin one from the basin. It stopped a few feet away, head low, eyes steady. Not asking, not begging, just waiting. The cowboy swallowed hard. He understood then that the number wasn't the problem. The problem was what that number demanded from him. And the decision he made next would change every life in that valley, including his own. The cowboy drove back into town just before dusk, dust still clinging to his boots and the weight of the valley sitting heavy on his chest. He didn't stop at home. He went straight to the places where people still remembered things, the feed store, the diner, the old vet clinic at the edge of town. He didn't ask big questions at first, just casual ones. Ever hear of anyone keeping animals out past the North Ridge? Anyone used to work that old ranch? At first, he got the same shrugs he'd always seen. Then a pause, a look away, a tightening around the eyes. At the feed store, the owner leaned on the counter a little longer than necessary. There was a man, he said finally. Quiet type. Took in animals nobody wanted. Hurt ones. Old ones. Folks laughed about it. What happened to him? The cowboy asked. The owner exhaled. Health went bad. Wouldn't take help. Said the animals didn't need people if they learned the land. At the diner, a waitress wiped the same spot twice before speaking. He stopped coming in one winter. No funeral. Just gone. By the time the cowboy reached the vet clinic, the story had sharpened into something harder to carry. The caretaker had known he was dying. He'd prepared the valley slowly, training the animals to rotate, to rely on each other, to survive without daily human presence. A controlled disappearance, not abandonment. The old vet confirmed it quietly, pulling a file from a dusty cabinet. He made me promise not to force removal unless someone came willing to take responsibility. Said the wrong rescue would kill them faster than nature ever could. The cowboy stared at the floor. Responsibility. The word followed him like a shadow. Driving back to the ranch under a sky streaked with red, he felt something twist inside him. He'd spent months avoiding the past. His wife's tools still hung where she left them, her boots untouched by dust. He thought grief was something you waited out. But grief didn't leave. It waited. Back at the valley, the animals lifted their heads as his headlights swept across the grass. None ran. None panicked. They recognized the sound now. He stepped out and stood there, hands on his hips, breathing in the cool night air. The caretaker's voice echoed in his mind, imagined but clear. If someone comes, they'll know. The cowboy realized the inheritance wasn't the ranch. It was the choice. He could turn away, let systems swallow the valley, reduce living beings to paperwork and good intentions. Or he could step into a role he never asked for, one that demanded patience, loss, and belief in something bigger than survival. A goat bleated softly. Somewhere, water moved over stone. The cowboy looked up at the stars and felt the weight of his wife's absence beside him. Not as pain this time, but as steadiness. I hear you, he said aloud, unsure who he meant. And for the first time since the funeral, he stopped running from what came next. Morning came with a decision still unresolved, heavy as the fog that settled low in the valley. The cowboy stood at the edge of the stream, watching animals move through their quiet routines. Nothing here was rushed. Nothing was wasted. Life flowed in patterns refined by time and necessity. And now, by inheritance, those patterns rested on him. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen longer than he meant to. A land agent's number sat saved but untouched. One call, and the ranch would become someone else's problem. Developers. State management. A large rescue organization with good intentions and strict rules. Any of them would help. But help, he'd learned, wasn't always gentle. He pictured trailers rolling in, herds forced together, animals separated from the land that taught them how to live. The caretaker's work undone in weeks. His chest tightened. Staying wasn't noble. It was terrifying. He ran the numbers again and again in his head. Feed costs, fencing repairs, veterinary care. He wasn't wealthy. He was barely comfortable. One bad season could take everything. Grief had already taken so much. He knelt by the stream and let cold water run through his fingers, grounding himself. He remembered the early years of his marriage. Long days, little money. Choosing effort over ease because it mattered to someone he loved. That memory surprised him. The choice wasn't about saving animals. It was about refusing to abandon something that trusted him. By midday, he made the calls, but not the ones people expected. He contacted the vet first, then the feed store owner, a neighbor who still believed in handshakes. He didn't ask for miracles, just help, time, quiet support without spotlights or pressure. Word spread slowly, on purpose. That afternoon, the first truck arrived with hay. No logos, no cameras, just a man who parked, tipped his hat, and got to work. The animals watched from a distance, unsure but curious. The thin horse approached again, closer this time. The cowboy laid a flake of hay on the ground and stepped back. The horse sniffed, then ate. A small thing. A huge moment. As the sun lowered, the cowboy walked the valley one more time, marking areas for repair, planning rotations, learning names he hadn't spoken yet. The work ahead felt endless, but it felt real. That night, sitting by the truck with a cup of bad coffee, he made the decision official. He wasn't selling. He wasn't leaving. He was staying long enough to do it right, or fail honestly trying. The valley settled into darkness, alive with soft sounds of movement and breath. The ranch had chosen him. Now he had chosen it back. Change arrived quietly, the way it had to. No sirens, no banners, no sudden flood of strangers. Just early mornings, late evenings, and trucks that came and went without drawing attention. Hay stacked neatly where it wouldn't disrupt grazing paths. Temporary fencing guided, never forced. Water troughs were added slowly, placed near familiar springs so the animals wouldn't panic or scatter. The cowboy learned fast. He learned which horses tolerated touch and which only accepted presence, which cattle moved as a group and which needed space, which goats tested every boundary just to be sure it still existed. Each animal carried its own history written in scars, posture, and eyes. The vet arrived at dawn one morning, quiet and serious. Together, they walked the valley, observing more than intervening. Some animals needed immediate care. Infected hooves, untreated wounds, old fractures that healed wrong. Others surprised them with how well they'd adapted, bodies shaped by survival rather than neglect. Whoever set this up, the vet said softly, knew what he was doing. Not all the news was good. A few animals were weaker than they looked. One sheep collapsed during a routine check. A calf struggled to stand after the heat rose. Each loss, small as it seemed in the scope of hundreds, hit hard. The cowboy learned quickly that saving lives didn't mean saving all of them. He didn't hide from that truth. Neighbors began stopping by, not out of curiosity, but out of quiet respect. Someone dropped off mineral blocks. Someone else repaired a section of fence without being asked. A woman left a box of gloves on the tailgate with a note that read, "For the work ahead." The animals noticed. They began approaching sooner when trucks arrived. They rested closer to new water sources. The thin horse allowed the cowboy within arm's length before stepping away. No fear, just caution. Progress measured itself in inches, not miles. One afternoon, the cowboy found himself sitting in the old shed, notebook open on his knee. He added his own entries beneath the caretaker's fading ink. Feed counts, health notes, small observations that might matter later. He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. As the days passed, the valley felt different. Not louder, not tamer, just steadier. Like something fragile had been reinforced rather than replaced. Standing at the ridge at sunset, the cowboy watched animals move across the grass in loose, familiar patterns. The system held. For now. But he knew the hardest part wasn't the rescue itself. It was what came after, how to protect this place once the world found out it existed. By the time the first cold front swept down from the hills, the valley no longer felt like a fragile secret waiting to collapse. It felt organized, alive in a steadier way. Grass that had once been cropped to dust now stood tall in patches. The stream ran clearer where stone channels had been rebuilt by hand. Animals moved with purpose instead of panic. The ranch was healing. The cowboy noticed the changes daily. Ribs slowly disappeared beneath thickening coats. Limping gaits softened into careful strength. Eyes that once watched everything now watched only what mattered. Survival had given way to something rarer, stability. And without realizing it, the same shift had begun inside him. Grief didn't vanish. It never did. But it no longer filled every quiet space. His days had weight now. Purpose. The kind that asked something of him in return. Each morning started with movement, checking water, counting heads, adjusting rotations the caretaker once designed. Each night ended with tired bones and a mind finally willing to rest. The thin horse changed the most. Its coat darkened, catching light where it once swallowed it. It began waiting near the old shed at dawn, not close enough for touch, but close enough to acknowledge him. When he spoke, it listened. When he stopped, it stayed. Trust earned inch by inch. Word of the ranch leaked out eventually. It always does. But it didn't explode the way he feared. A small article ran in the local paper. No address, no head count. Just a quiet story about a forgotten valley and a man doing things slowly on purpose. Help arrived the right way. Extra hay dropped off without questions. A fence repaired without a bill. The vet checked in without pressure. The cowboy learned to accept support without surrendering control. Standing on the ridge one evening, he looked out over land he nearly sold sight unseen. Below him, animals grazed in patterns shaped by memory and care. The caretaker's system still held, but now it had protection. In the shed, the notebook rested open on the last page. Beneath years of fading ink, he added one line. They're safe for now. He closed it gently and placed it back where it belonged. As the sun slipped behind the hills, shadows stretched across the valley. Animals settled naturally near shelter and water, choosing the place they trusted. The ranch wasn't reborn as something new. It was reborn as something remembered. And just when the cowboy allowed himself to believe the story had found its calm ending, a letter arrived days later. Official, stamped, and heavy with consequence. One envelope, enough to threaten everything he had built. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table for hours. The cowboy already knew what it was. County notice. Environmental review. Questions about land use and livestock counts. The kind of attention that arrived once something forgotten was remembered by the wrong people. He opened anyway. The letter was formal, but not cruel. An inspection request, a timeline, a warning dressed as procedure. Someone had noticed activity where there wasn't supposed to be any. The valley's existence had crossed an invisible line. For a moment, the old fear returned. The same tightness he'd felt after the funeral. The same instinct to brace for loss. But this time, something was different. He didn't face it alone. He gathered documents, vet reports, land records, the caretaker's notes. He made calls, not in panic, but in order. The vet showed up. The neighbors spoke when asked. Even the old feed store owner wrote a statement about the valley's quiet history. When the inspector arrived, there were no theatrics. Just facts. Proof of sustainable land use. Evidence that the animals were healthier here than anywhere else they'd be sent. The man walked the valley slowly, asking questions, taking notes. At the end, he nodded once. "You've got something rare here," he said, "and you're doing it right." The approval wasn't permanent. Nothing ever was. But it was enough. That night, the cowboy returned to the ridge and stood where the caretaker once must have stood, watching animals settle into darkness, listening to the land breathe. He thought about inheritance. He'd inherited grief. He'd inherited land. But what the ranch gave him back was something he didn't know he'd lost. Direction. Purpose didn't arrive as a grand revelation. It showed up in routines, in care, in choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. The thin horse approached him one last time before night fully fell. It stood close enough now to feel its warmth. The cowboy reached out and rested his hand against its neck. The horse didn't flinch. The valley held. Months later, life moved forward. Not perfectly, but honestly. The ranch remained quiet, protected, alive. The cowboy stopped thinking of it as something he inherited. It was something he belonged to. Some places don't ask to be saved. They wait to be understood. If this story reminded you that purpose can appear when you least expect it, share it. Because somewhere, something forgotten is still waiting for the right person to come home.